I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, let me say thank you for watching this video, and hopefully you're enjoying your holiday season. This video will fit into a series of videos that I have made previously under the title or playlist in my channel, Systemic Foundations, and that's because I'm recasting Jungian typology in a manner that is harmonizing it with empirical data, what's been made known to us by other philosophers, psychologists, and what the fields of cognitive science, neuroscience, and psychology in general, what all the research and all the theoretical elements and all the philosophical tenets and argumentative structures and debates that are presenting itself currently in Western culture. I am taking all that has sort of poured and seeped from that, wedding it all together in a new, I shouldn't say completely new because I'm not throwing out much, I'm just synthesizing many more elements into my view and depiction of Jungian typology. And so thus the name Systemic Foundations, because they're the founding ideas, or really structural models, the frameworks at which I have for viewing the world that heavily influence how I look at typology. And so it's been quite a while since I've done one of those videos, and so I would like to get back on that course and saying that the topic of this video will be on embodiment theory. And now the name on embodiment theory is an exposition or just a description of embodiment theory, but I think I should talk about what embodiment theory is, or really where that name comes from is the psychologist Jean Piaget. And Jean Piaget, he was the first scientist per se, but there's different takes on Piaget's work and how much one should pay attention to it. But Piaget, he came up with many interesting recasting of previous Spinozian ideas in empirical dress, if one would say that, because most of his research is like that of an ontologist, one who goes out and watches primates or watches a species in their natural habitat. Piaget, his experimental setting was just watching kids and owning a psychological practice and dealing with children. So people have a problem with Piaget's stamp, empirical stamp in psychology, but there have been many things that Piaget has proposed that empiricism has shown him to be true about. And so Piaget is the empirical lens at which I will be, or the empirical element at which I will be fusing into our understanding of personality per se, because fundamentally the question I'm asking always is, what does it mean to be human, and moving from what does it mean to be human, or what is a human being, to the smaller or just more localized or higher definite scales of analyses, particularly when it's pertaining to personality and why somebody might think a certain way or be a certain way or whatever, what have you. So Piaget is the individual who came up with embodiment theory, and what Piaget proposed roughly is that people having the bodies we have, people have certain bodies. So, excuse me, I should say, people have certain bodies, and the bodies they have determine what they are. The functionality of the structure determines the interface that the structure has with the environment. Because Piaget was a constructivist, he believed knowledge was a process, or it was something that was being made over time. And so because the body, it has a functional construction, the functionality of the body interacting with the environment creates the structure of knowledge that is within a human being. So you cannot have knowledge, or you cannot have intelligence or understanding without a body. So knowledge is what it is because of the body, and the brain primarily is what it is because of the body. If we did not have the bodies we have, we would not have the neurological structures that we possess, and we would not perceive the world in the manner in which we perceive the world. So our bodies determine what we can know, what we can think, what we can perceive. And this is something that Piaget cast in an empirical vantage point, but it's something that goes back to Spinoza, it's something that goes back to Kant. And it's the thought, even in Kant, that our perception systems, the world presents itself and it's transformed in a manner by our perception systems. It's that we see what we see because we're human, as it would differ for another organism. And there is a very famous paper written about the perception of a bat, and I cannot recall the author's name, unfortunately, at this moment in time, but it's to say, well, at least in that paper, as a rebuttal against sort of the reductionistic views that it seeped itself into cognitive science and neuroscience, and showing that perception, consciousness, in a sense, is a very tricky phenomenon, and it's something that we should sort of bite our teeth and back away from coming out with such strong vigor and vehement distaste for some of the previous modes of thought, insofar as how human consciousness worked and how conception was conceived by previous philosophers. It's the sort of threat, or I would say temptation a lot of times, by empiricists or corporeal thinkers, is a reductionist genealogy of the state of affairs within the mind. And this paper on the perception of a bat was particularly attacking that aspect. But what's important, or at least what I want to note, is that it goes into great lengths and detail to contrast the human visual perceptual system versus the bat's auditory perceptual system, and them being able to take and see the world or understand the world through the vibration and the bouncing of sound off of objects, and having this sonorific vantage point. So what the paper showed was that to a bat, reality constitutes as anything that sound can bounce off of. So if sound cannot bounce off the object, to the bat it doesn't exist. Sound is not going to bounce off of a photon. A sound is not going to bounce off of gases. A sound's not going to bounce off of something. Sound works in gases in some respects, but sound isn't actually bouncing off the elements per se. What sound? Just to show this, that because the bat sees the world through sound, there are things that the bat's going to miss. Just as we as people, we see the world primarily through our visual cortex, just our visual system, our eyes, we are going to miss aspects of reality. And science has shown that true, and why we have invented things such as technology, particularly because of the problem of perception and measurement. They're necessary in many respects, because there are things that we just really can't perceive or pick up on in the environment without their aid and their assistance, but are wholly necessary in determining the actual structure of reality, or what we can understand about the actual structure of reality. It is to say this, that if you take a fish, because there's many fish that process the world through magnetic resonating, they see the world through a magnetic lens. It's the magnetic wavelengths traveling through the ocean. That's what they perceive. And so if you ask that fish what the world was to it, it's just a wave of magnetic fields about. And these magnetic fields and fluctuations determine the nature of reality, and whatever doesn't exist in these magnetic fields and fluctuations aren't real to the fish. And the fish can't even perceive them. You have some fish that have sensitive, and it's not, these are sort of simplifications, because of course fish can use their eyes. Some fish have better photon receptory systems in their eyes than others, but they can make out blobs and different things like that. And the same with the bat. There's assimilation by reality by which of their nose and their eyes to some respects, though they may not be the greatest. Their eyes may not be the greatest, but their nose are ridiculously strong. It's the same thing about people. We're aided by our ears and our nose, but it's just our perception, what we're literally, what the brain is presenting to us, because I'm what's called a transcendental idealist, insofar as, well, before I even knew what that was, cognitive science and neuroscience told me this is how the brain works. So it just said, it says this, that we can't perceive reality for everything that it is. And I think that there's too many examples out there and that are extant within just the empirical landscape to show that we can't literally hear, taste, smell, and see everything that's out there that's happening in reality. But our brain, even though we can't see, hear, or smell at all, represents an image of reality. So how accurate is that brain representation in accordance with to what's actually or factually going on in the world? And it's just to say that there is a dissonance in between the two entities, what's versus what independent reality is and what our perception is. It seems that our perception morphs independent reality, so that we, in its interface with independent reality, it morphs it in such a way that we can actually see, know, and understand what's going on, so that we can be functional and effective within the environment by which of achieving our goals and our means, the evolutionary drives that were embedded within us. So, and that seems to be the picture in the case for a bat or a fish. You can take a dog, even. Dogs are orientated to reality. Their perception mainly happens mostly through their nose, and showing this, that our having the perception relation that we have by way of our bodies determines even the actions that we take. It will even determine so far to the moral frameworks and the sort of cultural frameworks that can emerge. And I wrote a paper on this about just the sort of physiology, biology, and evolutionary history of morality and cultural constructions, because I'm tired of all the social constructivism I hear out in the world. I think we need to sort of have a more acrimonious view of things, but this to say this, that dogs, they participate in the type of behaviors and actions they do because they're dogs. They're concerned with the world primarily because of the perception system that they have. If dogs did not smell to get through the world, they would not greet themselves in the manner that they greet one another. They would not explore the environment in the manner that they explore it. They would not be so centric or focused on they wouldn't be so centric and focused on certain aspects of even their existence if they weren't all factory based primarily. And I guess just some very simple concrete examples are that people don't go around peeing on fire hydrants, but dogs do, because that's a dominance, that's a sort of a dominance play or a dominance It's not a dominance play or dominance game for people because we don't have the same perception systems, and we can smell in our bathrooms, of course, when urine is disseminated, and we can subconsciously smell sort of the genetic integrity of another person, and we process these things subconsciously. But dogs, they smell these things, they process them consciously, and they're consciously driven to respond to these things and make the primary structure or basis for how they're going to exist and present themselves in the environment based on smell. Just a majority of what constitutes what a dog does and how it presents itself in the environment and how it reacts to things is based on smell. Now, of course, the dogs have amazing hearing, better hearing than most people, and yeah, of course, your dog is going to hear things and look around in the environment and be interested in what it sees, but it's much more keen to what it smells and pays more attention to what it smells than what it hears or what it sees. Okay, and so I suppose extension to people is that people, we don't differ from bats, we don't differ from fish, and we don't differ from dogs. And it's just to say that to extend the example of the dog to the fish and to the bat, they do what they do and they represent themselves in the environment. You'd even take the base mannerisms of their schematic structures from what they are. Functionally, they're only able to do what they're made up to be. You can't sort of who they are is determined by what they are. And that's at one resolution of analyses. This is the largest scale when I'm talking about species at this point, and people as organisms or as species, we fall in the same sort of category and train of thought, and so far as us being human beings makes us very specific things, and it even determines to a very strong extent how we express ourselves in an environment, what we're going to be interested in, what we do, and what we make and what we construct. And so it's this, and this is embodiment theory roughly, or at least the way I'm extending and using embodiment theory. I'm springing from Piaget's, I'm going from Kantian, Spinoza, I'm going from Kant, Spinoza, and Piaget to personality with this idea, and it's to move now towards the person. We have if anybody has read any Freud, or if anybody has even read Jung, there are collective aspects to each person's existence, and they're there because biology said that they're there, and that's it. That's the reason they're there, and that's the only reason they're there. And it's here that one can sort of get a picture for the fact that there may be very strongly a real structure of existence for us based on what we are, and we do not go outside of this structure of existence, and we can't really extend beyond it. When you're human, you're human. And I think intuitively people know this, because there's essential characteristics, there's things in us that aren't changing, because if you took a person and say you put an extra arm on them, or you put a third eye, you give them a humanoid figure, but then you cover them in scales and make them red, and well, that's Hollywood and that's sci-fi, and we consider those intelligent life forms. We don't consider them people, because after a certain point you start putting different characteristics, you literally change the physical structure of them, you stop recognizing them as human, because they wouldn't even do, and I think we instinctively know this, they wouldn't even do nor perceive the world the same way we do, because they're different and their physical makeup and orientation. If you have literally a third eye, I mean, yeah, you're going to be visually perceptive based, but you're going to be visually perceptive based in a, I don't even want to know. Well, at least I can't know, but I don't even want to throw my imagination there. Just the point of that image is just to show that having a body determines what a thing is, per se. The body it has, what it is, determines who it is, or how it moves, or just how it functions, what it does. All of that arises from the body it has. And so it's just to say that when we're talking about typology, in some respects, there's just claims that people make about a certain personality, or just a certain cognitive function, or just how they even relate, and which couldn't be true if they considered the larger scope and parameter of what it means to be a human. The bent against introversion and saying that introverts are antisocial. Fundamentally, people are social creatures. We are, to the T, more than we are anything else, more than we're rational or irrational, we're social beyond and without a shadow of a doubt. That's why we have the main concerns and the main issues and topics at play with even in societies, or why culture even exists, is because we're social creatures and beings. We share that with primates, chimpanzees and bonobos, and other animals, but it seems that nothing takes the cake of sociability or sociality or just social centrism as human beings do. In fact, we do this weird thing where we squeak, we hawk, and we squawk, and we squeal, and make hisses and buzzes, and it has some sort of syntactical meaning to it, and we call it language. I don't know if you've ever stepped outside, but if you have any doubt that people are social, just see if anything else is able to do this insofar as communicating itself in this manner through verbal speech and language. I mean, for me, it's amazing. But it's just to say that, that's logically, it's not true. It's not true. Introverts aren't antisocial. They can't be antisocial. They're humans. They're everything, whether we're looking at somebody's personality, they're people first. It's to say that when you're talking about somebody's, and it's why you can't use typology per se, at least embodiment theory is what allows me to, I think embodiment theory is a constraint in saying that, for me, and so far in saying that you can't use typology to come to some conclusions about a person's behavior, because behavior is something that comes down to factors of just being a human that typology or temperament does not really cover. I suppose to give a preview of how embodiment theory ultimately affects how I look at typology is to say this, that if sort of structure determines function and function determines interface or interplay, because how something works is really important of how it actually exists in reality. So if there is that relationship, which I'm fairly convinced there is that relationship, then that is something on a macro scale for human beings, but something that can be brought to a lower resolution with the personalities themselves. And this is where more thought comes in, per se, from evolutionary psychology and evolutionary theory, Jung's collective unconscious, and his idea of archetypes. But it's to say this, that your personality, so I guess what I'm not really sure is if I want to introduce this idea in this video, because I don't want to make it too complicated. But I would say this, that you have the bodies, because we're human beings, we have the bodies we have, and we have the perception we have. But I'll leave it there. So I'll leave embodiment theory part 1 in this video there, and then go into embodiment theory part 2 in another video to specifically talk about perception and how that leads me to the thoughts I have on personality. Thank you.